to episode 5 of Revolutionary Roads, a podcast of the North Carolina History Project here at the John Locke Foundation. My name's Donald Bryson. I'm CEO of the John Locke Foundation. We're excited to continue down this revolutionary road of North Carolina's very rich and robust history of its role during the American Revolution. Every episode we have a new guest and we have a new topic as we go through the history. And this episode we have a new guest. It's Bob Rosser. Bob's a longtime political consultant, has a Master's of History degree from NC State. He's also the new project coordinator for the NC 250 project here at the John Locke Foundation. We're obviously very interested and excited about America's 250th birthday anniversary coming up, and we have a dedicated project to that. And so we brought Bob on board, and we're very excited to have Bob. But Bob's very passionate about North Carolina history itself. I think, didn't you mention to me one time that your master's thesis was actually on why North Carolina joined the Revolution?
Sure was, yeah. Donald, great to be with you today. My focus of my master's thesis was why North Carolina participated in the Revolution, because we were an individual colony,
right?
And we didn't have to participate. And my whole thesis was why.
Right.
So this is a great opportunity for me to have fun, go back with that master's, and finally use it for something good.
There you go. Well, we're happy to have you on. In our previous episodes, we've talked through the War of Regulation and what happened up to May of 1771, and the Battle of Alamance. Then we had the Edenton Tea Party, people becoming very upset about the British Tea Act, and the ladies of Edenton, North Carolina, standing sort of in solidarity with the Boston Tea Party and what had happened there. And then a lot of things are happening on a more global perspective. There's the battles of Lexington and Concord that are going on. The First Continental Congress is happening. And then the people of Mecklenburg County declare their independence. There's the Mecklenburg Declaration and the Mecklenburg Resolves, and we talked about the myth and the mystery of that. And we also talked about the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, which is sort of the first battle of liberty in the South, and how the Loyalists were turned back there at Moores Creek, just northwest of Wilmington. I was going to say Edenton, but it's Wilmington. And now we are in early 1776. That was in February of 1776. And this takes us to what is still a small town of Halifax, where the 4th Provincial Congress meets in Halifax. What's going on in North Carolina, and what's drawing everybody to Halifax as of April of 1776?
Well, again, great to be with you today. At the Halifax, when the Halifax Resolves were brought up in the 4th Provincial Congress, you had, I guess you really have to go back to 1775, because the royal governor had dissolved the colonial assembly.
Right.
And that was the reason
why.
That
was Josiah Martin, right?
Yeah, royal governor Josiah Martin. And for a while there, he fled. He lived in Tryon Palace, in the governor's palace, and he left the palace, sent his family off, I think, up to New York. He went down to the Cape Fear River, Fort Johnston, and
which is Southport, right?
Yeah,
in Brunswick County.
Brunswick County, right there. It was a town of Brunswick there, and he tried to kind of still have an impact on things there. And he was coordinating some of the strategy of what he thought would be good to try to get the colonies to stop rebelling,
right,
by rousing up the Loyalists. So he was doing some of that from that fort, and then he actually went on a ship called the Cruiser, and that's what was going on in that area. So you didn't have a colonial assembly, and so the provincial congresses were important to fill that gap. You had the 3rd provincial congress was in Hillsborough, and that was the first congress that actually sort of set up a revolutionary government.
Right.
And
you went to a reenactment of the 3rd provincial congress.
It was a dramatization.
Sure.
It was really very well done. I really enjoyed it. But it they basically divided the state into 6 militia districts, which became political districts, really. But
Interesting.
They would create the Minutemen militia groups out of that in each of those districts, and then they became the areas that sent representatives to the future provincial congresses.
Yeah.
So coming out of that was about this time, 1775. You had a period where they were meeting and doing things to set up that government and flesh out what was to be the revolutionary government of North Carolina as they met. Then you went into 1776. At this time you had Tom Paine issued the pamphlet Common Sense,
right,
which was a very just powerful message to people who were interested in dealing with the king and were frustrated, and it served to polarize a lot of people who hadn't really gotten involved.
Sure.
And so that was going on. And then you had Morris Creek Bridge, as you had mentioned. Y'all have already talked about that. So going into April, you had a lot of things stirring.
Right.
And Halifax, the more I've read about it, was really a bustling market town,
Sure,
political hotbed. You had really strong personalities and characters that came out of there. Wiley Jones, a lot of people never heard of him, but he was like a Thomas Jefferson, Sam Adams type.
right.
You had William R. Davie, who ended up, all the things he did, starting at the University of North Carolina.
This is my favorite part of history, or one of my favorite parts of history, because this is when we start hearing a lot of county and town names come up. Jones, Wiley Jones with Jones County,
Right.
William R. Davie with Davie County,
Right.
Abner Nash is going to come up, Nash County, Nashville.
Right.
So it's now we know where we get those names from.
Yeah, but Halifax was happening. I mean, it was a little further west than Newbern, where that was kind of the seat of the old aristocracy, the establishment where the governor lived.
Sure.
But going towards Halifax was getting more into the back country. Hillsborough was more into the back country. It's like the center of the back country.
But Halifax is still somewhat accessible by river, though. Right?
Yeah, it's on the Roanoke River. Yeah, it's on the Roanoke River, and it's amazing. Yeah, I love Halifax because I wish it was more developed and I could see it as a little Williamsburg, actually, if it was kind of developed for historical purposes. But it's got the Roanoke River right there.
Yeah.
And so it was center of commerce. Political thought was debated there, and they did a lot of their meetings there. So, leading into all of what happened with the Resolves, it was a hotbed of political thought.
Yeah. So they come together, and we talked about the Mecklenburg Declaration a couple of episodes ago, and we talked about how state flags are strange and interesting to study. North Carolina's is interesting because it looks a lot like Texas's state flag, except we've got 2 dates on ours instead of a single lone star. And we talked about the 1775 date. On May 20th, 1775, that's when the Mecklenburg Declaration was mythologically or actually passed. We talked through that. But then there's April 12th, 1776.
Right.
And this is the First and Freedom date. That's why we have all these license plates as we drive across the state that say First and Freedom. What did the 4th Provincial Congress do in Halifax?
Well, what they did that was different, after the battles of Lexington and Concord up in Massachusetts, up and down the colonies, there were resolves that were put forth by local colonial assemblies to show their support.
Right.
And partly to kind of rouse up their people, but just to show support and help unite the colonies. That sense of feeling was coming around. Again, you got to remember, from our point of view now, we think of it as the United States. Well, back then, each colony was its own separate entity.
Right.
And uniting them was an important part of the whole revolutionary push.
Yeah.
So each of these colonies were doing resolves to support what had happened at Lexington and Concord. Most of them would say we need to stand up, be firm, be solid, have solidarity together, things like that. But they still kept one foot in kind of out the door, that if they could possibly reconcile with the king, that maybe they could come to some sort of resolution or reconciliation, because they didn't really want to totally cut ties.
Right.
So what happened in Halifax that was different was they actually used the word independence.
Yeah.
And so it was a huge thing. They did a process that actually we saw unfold with Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence. They actually created a committee. I think they went into session on April the 8th, and then by April 12th, had this committee had come out with this resolution. So there was a key line to the Halifax Resolves that made it different. And it was that it said, resolved, that the delegates for this colony to the Continental Congress be empowered to concur with delegates of other colonies in declaring independency.
Right.
And I love that word, independency.
We don't say that word anymore.
It had a Y on the end of it. Not independence, independency. But yeah, that was the key thing, that they actually went that far.
Yeah.
And that sounds like maybe not a big deal, but they went farther than anybody had said in the Mecklenburg Resolves, or there was a Liberty Point Resolves earlier in 1775 and at Cross Creek down in the Fayetteville area. There was Tryon Resolves. All of them were like, we're upset with Parliament, and we want to get behind the folks that fought at Lexington and Concord, and all these things were going on in these other resolves, but they never said the word independency.
Yeah, but we stand for all the others where we sort of stand for constitutional rights, except for maybe the Mecklenburg Declaration, which may or may not have existed. But that wasn't even speaking for all of North Carolina. This was speaking for all of North Carolina.
Right, exactly. And it was given these delegates not orders, but it was empowering them to declare independency.
Yeah, basically saying when there is going to be a vote on independence, vote yes.
If there was a vote, that concept wasn't even there yet.
Right.
So what happened was, I think it was Joseph Hughes, who was one of the delegates, got it and took it to the floor of the Continental Congress, and then soon after that, Richard Henry Lee was with the Virginia delegation, actually introduced a declaration, and then all the colonies started joining together.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's why it was important, though, was actually saying that word and declaring independency.
Yeah. The first domino had to be somewhere.
Right.
Right.
And the what ifs of history, we've talked about it many times, but the what ifs of history, if that had not happened, would the conversation at the Continental Congress gone down that road to where they actually would have done a Declaration of Independence? Who knows? But it's certainly an important facet of our history, and it's something that North Carolina should be proud of, that we provided a model for the rest of the country. And if you look at it in a more global picture, none of this concept had been going on anywhere in the world. I mean, for folks, young people, you just assume this kind of thought was around before. It wasn't around before. This was new thinking and bold thinking, that you would actually go up against the king of the most powerful empire in the world, as we often say.
Right. Which was true at the time. I mean, they really were.
It was
incredibly powerful army, incredibly powerful navy.
Yeah, yeah.
What are we going to do?
Yeah. Some people say, was it radical? Heck yeah, it was radical.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just unheard of.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about the provincial congresses a little bit ago, and you talked about how they started meeting before Josiah Martin's administration collapsed. And when we say collapsed, I mean it collapsed. He dissolved the state legislature, and then he went down to Fort Johnston. Fort Johnston burned. He sits on this warship for a while. But there's no actual state government, and I think this is a clear point that the Patriots, the revolutionaries in North Carolina, and those meeting in Philadelphia, they weren't anarchists, right? They weren't saying no government at all. They wanted a constitutional government that protected people's rights. And so, am I right in saying that essentially these provincial congresses started meeting because there needed to be somebody representing the people and trying to put some sort of government together? Is that about right?
Yeah, and well, the first two, there were grievances, and they were trying to air those grievances so that Parliament, the king, would pay attention, and then they kept kind of ratcheting up the heat. But yeah, and then but they still were holding colonial assemblies. When Governor Martin dissolved the assembly, it made it much more important.
Right.
That third provincial congress took the place of the colonial assembly at that point.
Right.
And that's critical.
That sort of gets to my question on why do these guys meeting in Halifax feel like they had the right to speak for North Carolina? I mean, that sort of gets to that point, right?
Yeah, the third provincial congress had over 200 delegates from all over the colony,
right?
Different areas, and then the Halifax meeting, the fourth provincial congress, had 83 delegates.
Right.
Still, covered the keep wanting to say state, but covered the colony. But it was a very representative body, and largely made up of men who had been in the colonial assembly.
Yeah. So who you mentioned these men? Who were the leaders of this crowd in Halifax?
Samuel Johnston was one. Richard Caswell had been involved before at the one in Hillsborough, third provincial
and we've
Congress.
heard Richard. For people listening on the podcast, we've heard Richard Caswell's name several times. He was an officer for Governor Tryon at the Battle of Alamance, and then he's a Patriot officer at the Battle of Moores Creek.
Right.
So he switched sides, and now he's declaring independence at Halifax. He ends up being the first. Spoiler alert: he becomes the first governor of the state.
Right.
He's
Very
everywhere.
active.
Samuel Johnston, interesting character. I think it would be very fair to call him part of the aristocracy of the state. He is not the namesake of Johnston County. He's not one of those names that we pull up, but it's his uncle, Gabriel Johnston, who had been royal governor of North Carolina, and that's the namesake of Johnston County. I live down around Clayton, and so I was trying to piece that history together. But that he goes on and he becomes he is the president of this provincial congress, or the chair of it, and then he goes on and is president of both constitutional conventions in North Carolina. He becomes a state senator. Then he becomes, I think, the first U.S. senator from North Carolina, and I think is the sixth governor of the state. I mean, this man, his name just keeps popping up, but he's clearly thought of as a leader here. I say all that to say he was notorious, I think is a fair word to say, in the War of Regulation, because he wrote the Johnston Act, which said that if a leader in the War of Regulation, or the regulator movement, whatever you want to call it, has not surrendered to the royal government yet by the time when they get to Alamance, they can be shot on sight.
Whoa.
So that's what Samuel Johnston's saying, and now he's chairing a provincial congress declaring independence. I mean, he's really come right around on this.
Well, there's, as we all probably know, in politics, this is politics. Folks can switch sides very quickly.
Yeah.
And depending on their own personal needs, of some nickel drops and they finally see another side that's different or whatever. But yeah, there were a lot of the the leaders who had stood with Governor Tryon in the regulator movement flipped right over.
They did.
It's kind of amazing.
It is, and something changes in their minds over time. Samuel Johnston, if you look back at the records, was always very critical of British tax policies, which is, I mean, if we're talking about it, that's the crux of the revolution, or British tax policies. And if those tax policies exist, how they're implemented, and then why they can be implemented on people who have no representation and who voted for those policies altogether. That's it. And he was always critical of that. Samuel Johnson just didn't care for the regulator movement itself.
Exactly.
And so that's just always been very, very interesting to me. Let's take a step back a little bit. They've declared independence. They've not talked about how they have constitutional rights as British citizens. They are saying we would like to be independent of Great Britain. We've not talked yet about what are these fellows risking when they're saying this and putting their names on the Halifax Resolves, because this isn't the Declaration of Independence. This is before the Declaration of Independence.
But it still would be seen as high treason.
Yeah.
And for high treason, hanging was, as we heard kind of in the Declaration of Independence dialogue, you always hear about that. We'll hang together. But that wasn't a funny thing. Hanging was one of the ways they would punish. A couple of things I read, they would hung, drawn, and quartered. You've heard of that. That would be another way of punishing somebody for treason. And beheading, I read that too. So it was not something to take lightly.
Yeah, hung, drawn, and quartered sounds like, well, it sounds barbaric because it is barbaric, but it's not something they just did, several hundred years ago, back in the Middle Ages or whatever. People were drawn and quartered in Britain in the 1740s. I mean, it happened. There were people in memory who could probably who had probably read a newspaper article about it happening, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not good stuff. And then beyond that, I mean, even if they were, if somehow they escaped that punishment, their lands would be taken, their wealth, and most of these men were men of means. So, but they would be ruined.
Yeah.
Their lands, their property, their families would be ruined because they would be basically become impoverished from what the steps the crown would take against them.
Yeah. This very clearly is sort of the first domino, I think, of the road to the Declaration of Independence of a colony then becoming a state and declaring independence, right? And that leads us to Thomas Jefferson writing, "All men are created equal." And there's been a lot of back and forth, particularly in recent years, and the 1619 Project coming out about Thomas Jefferson owning slaves and sort of the why that was wrong, but at the same time he's saying all men are created equal. I would argue that the owning of slaves was wrong morally, but that getting rid of slavery and coming to sort of civil rights equality was sped up significantly because he wrote those words down. Nonetheless, we still have the issue of slavery pops up in the Halifax Resolves, right? Because one of the grievances they have against the king is that they are offering freedom to enslave people that are willing to turn on their masters or join the British cause and things like that. How do we sort of reconcile that with our modern minds?
Well, a lot of it was tactics, and it's a touchy subject because of the way we see it today, of course. But it was used, the Patriot or Whig forces used it to stir up Eastern planters who had slaves. They used it against the king to say that the king was trying to stir up slave revolt.
Right.
So that was used that way. And at the same time, the Crown was trying to use it to really get forces that would go out and fight for them,
Right.
because they were looking to all through this period in 1770, late 1775 and early 76, they were trying to stir up loyalists
Right.
and against the rebellion, against the Whigs.
Right.
And whether you were a Highland Scot or whoever you were, or a slave, they were looking for bodies. They were looking for people to stand up and stand up with the crown.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's absolutely what was going on. I wouldn't quantify the Halifax Resolves as a pro-slavery document. I think there were several men there who owned slaves, and I think that's absolutely true. I also think that they were concerned about, when you start seeing things, if you're in the mind of a 17th century or an 18th century landholder, and you start seeing words slave rebellion, you are immediately concerned about safety. I think it's fair to say. We had this issue. We talked about the John Locke Foundation did a mini documentary on the Edenton Tea Party called "A Letter to the King," which is available on YouTube, and I suggest people watch it. I think it's really good, and it won a Communications Excellence Award from the State Policy Network. But how do we deal with that when Penelope Barker, who is writing the Edenton Resolves at the Edenton Tea Party, they didn't throw tea in the river at Edenton, but how do we deal with that? And it seems, like she's a little two-faced. And the line that they put in there is each generation walks in the light that they have. Mm-hmm. Slavery was a part of life then, and it was unfortunate, and it was tragic, and we have progressed and sort of liberated ourselves mentally away from that and understand that was wrong. But these fellows were living in the life that they had, I think,
right.
is sort of where we have to rest with that.
Yeah. That was a big part of their economy, no doubt. Absolutely. Especially right there in Halifax, it was a mercantile economy. You had the river where you had seagoing ships going up as far as Halifax in that area, up the Roanoke River. So it was a great area of trade and commerce.
Yeah, slavery's always has a long and varied history in North Carolina, and I'm saying all that to say there's an interesting book on the Tuscarora War from the 1600s in North Carolina, or the early 1700s. And if readers want to take a look at that book, it's really interesting because that all had to do with the impetus of that was the slave trade, but with Native Americans, not Africans. And the Tuscarora sort of picked a fight. And North Carolina didn't have its own militia, and we actually were saved by South Carolina's militia,
they sent
which is a history that we are ashamed of and don't want to talk about when South Carolina has to save us. But here we are. Anyway, that's an interesting.
I think
piece
they brought
of
in another Indian tribe from South Carolina, if I remember right.
That I think that's also part of that story as well.
Yeah.
The first line of that book is, it was a hard place. And it's how difficult it was being a subsistence farmer in eastern North Carolina. And it was definitely at the time because it's a little swampy back in there. Let's talk about Moores Creek just a little bit. The Battle of Moores Creek Bridge had happened just 2 months earlier in February of 1776. Then they come to the Fourth Provincial Congress is in Halifax in 1776. Do you think that the battle sort of sped up the process to get to the Halifax Resolves?
Absolutely. I think it was a great moral victory. It was a victory, number one, and I think it was the first victory after Lexington and Concord for the Patriot forces. So that was feather in their cap, and word like that of their victory spread all through the colonies, emboldening each colonial assembly to move forward with revolutionary dialogue and message. But the actual victory itself, it provided a moral victory that just gave them a sense that they were going the right direction, that they could needed to do something else in the legislative
Yeah.
realm to go beyond just winning that battle,
Right.
and try to take this next step to freedom.
Yeah.
And there was no game plan. There was no blueprint.
Right.
They were just
Nobody done this before.
Nobody done this before. So but that battle was very heartening, I think, to those forces. And of course, as we said, like Richard Castle, there were several members who had fought, and a lot of members of the militia were also colonial assembly members.
Right.
And so, they were ready to move to the next step.
Yeah. No, they definitely were. So they passed the Halifax Resolves. They sent it off to Philadelphia. There's a long history between 1776 and the end of that war, and we'll talk about a good bit of that throughout the rest of this podcast. But let's talk about how the Halifax Resolves has affected North Carolina through history. How do you think it's affected the culture and the identity of North Carolina over time?
Well, it was it provided a model for the Declaration when they got in Thomas Jefferson's hands and that committee. The process that Halifax the members of the Congress in Halifax put together to write the resolves, but was the same process they used in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And they created a committee, and then they ended up with a document that was then voted on. Of course, we don't know that. We say, oh, well, of course anybody would do that.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. It could have been one guy could have just domineered it and wrote the whole thing, but it was a committee that started. Of course, Thomas Jefferson ended up writing a lot of it with the Declaration, but all that was new ground. They were plowing new ground.
Yeah.
And so I think it's hugely important to our history, the history of freedom, that people around the world celebrate the Declaration of Independence, and we probably take it greatly for granted compared to other people around the world who see it as a beacon of hope and freedom.
Yeah.
But our role in that next step, there's little steps. Things don't just happen. I learned that working in politics. Things don't just happen.
Right.
Somebody has to take the courage, the initiative, take the risk to stand up and try to do what's right for their family, for freedom, for opportunity, and that's what went on in Halifax.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well put. I think most people that have done a good job of reading their history will say that the United States Declaration of Independence was an important document, not just for the founding of America, but in human history, in that it set off a chain reaction worldwide of other nations declaring their own independence and self-determination, and we have the spread of democracies and republics all over the world. But that doesn't happen without the Declaration of Independence first.
Right.
But it's also hard to see how quickly the Declaration of Independence would have happened had the Halifax Resolves not happened. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
I think it goes back to that word independency with a Y. It was just sort of politics before. There was kind of maybe giving and taking the way the relationship that this colonial assembly had with Parliament, kind of going back and forth, seeing what they could get out of the deal type thing.
Yeah.
But when they declared independence, that, all bets are off.
Yeah.
They became traitors.
Yeah.
That's where all that serious stuff started.
There's no going back.
No,
after that.
that's where all the serious stuff started. So I think that's why this is so important to the from a global perspective to the rest of the world is, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that came out largely as a result of Halifax, then going to Philadelphia, and with the Declaration from or the Resolves from Virginia that led to the Declaration in July. It's just huge.
Yeah.
It's just huge. But it goes back to that word independence. I think that's the real key.
Yeah. With a why.
It just with a why. Yeah.
I like
the why. I like the why.
Yeah, we've got to bring it back.
Yeah. So I've got a question for you.
All right.
So somebody asked me the other day. It's a really simple question, but we focus so much on the Declaration, and of course Halifax Resolves and all its import in that process. But what would have happened if we still had to win the war?
Yeah.
We still had to win the war. So we celebrate the Declaration, but we still had to win the war.
Yeah.
And so all these wonderful principles that we talk about and celebrate and teach and do all that, we still had to win the war. So you got to really look at this thing in total and how important, those guys who made that happen, George Washington and Nathaniel Greene and all the people struggling in each of these colonies, the militia members.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't a whole lot of redcoats and bluecoats fighting in North Carolina.
No.
It was largely a civil war between Tories and Loyalists against militia members, Minutemen in hunting shirts and
the committees of safety.
Yeah, all that had to go on. They had to win. Otherwise, there'd have been a whole lot of hanging or something going on if we hadn't won the war.
Yeah.
So that kind of struck me. We talk about the Declaration a lot, and it's absolutely important, but we still had to win.
Yeah.
And it was worth fighting for because it was such a powerful principle to fight for.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think the broader, culturally, we think July 4th, 1776, we declared independence, and that's it.
Yeah,
it's over. British said, you know what, you're right.
Right.
It's over. But no, for those original 13 states, that war lasted from 1775 through 1781. You're talking about 6 years of open conflict.
Absolutely.
And the big military clashes in North Carolina, the really big ones, actually happened the last year of the war. And spoiler, they're a part of the reason why Cornwallis ends up in Yorktown, Virginia, afterwards. And so these, if you're just an average North Carolinian, a farmer outside of Salisbury or a merchant in Edenton or something like that, you're having to deal with this reality for 6 long years and hope that these guys were right when they said we could be independent. And it's not like George Washington, very admirable man, first in the hearts of his countrymen, right? But it's not like he was racking up a lot of wins up in New York and Massachusetts.
But he won the last one. That's all that really matters.
Absolutely right. Well, Bob, we really appreciate it. Appreciate your time today. Appreciate all the work. Can you talk to folks a little bit about what your work is with the North Carolina History Project? Yeah,
well, we're just trying to get the word out about the 250th anniversary. If you're as old as I am, you remember the bicentennial in 1976.
It's just a lot easier to say than semi-quincentennial.
Yes, exactly. But the 250th celebration, we're trying to. There's other efforts that are going on. Cultural Resources, State Cultural Resources Department is, they're guiding some efforts and working with counties, historical societies. There's a legislative committee that's doing some work on it, and we're trying to complement and just nudge along wherever we can, especially in the video area.
Yeah.
Podcasts like this. We're doing the films on like what we've already done with the Edenton Tea Party. There's one coming out on the Moores Creek Bridge battle. And we've got some others that we're thinking about and some other small videos. But we think we really got to get some video out to the public because a lot of folks, that's the way they listen and learn and get excited about things. So we're excited about what some of the possibilities we can put together here in the next few months to have a really great celebration next year for the 250th anniversary.
No, I think there's a lot of things that are worth celebrating. A lot of the principles that we discussed today. If you liked what you've heard today, if you liked the history that we've talked about in this episode and other episodes, click like and subscribe, share with your friends, share with your family, and we hope that you listen to us next time on Revolutionary Roads.